Welcome back to Sunday School as we're looking at biblical stories in new ways from broader, wider perspectives, a higher altitude, kind of leaving our assumptions behind and coming to the Bible fresh. And so this morning we're going to talk about an interesting, enigmatic figure named Melchizedek from Scripture. And if you don't have that bird's eye view, if you don't leave your assumptions behind, you may miss something. So Melchizedek first appears in the Bible in the book of Genesis chapter 14. In other words, really early in the story, 2 chapters after we meet Abraham. So let's have a little bit of background first. In chapter 12, we meet Abraham, who is going to be the father of a new tribe, a different tribe, a tribe who are called to bless all the other tribes. Now, as I've mentioned before, this was a really revolutionary idea, a heightening of consciousness, because tribes were about themselves, about preserving and protecting and defeating other tribes. It was all about how strong they could get. My God can beat up your God. That's why you often see mentioned in the Old Testament how big a tribe is, how much stuff they have, how many fighting men they have. It kind of shows their strength and greatness. But this tribe of Abraham, this tribe has a mission to bless all the other tribes, a mission to live beyond simply the needs of their tribe. It goes beyond tribalism. It's me and mine first, to we're going to bless everyone else. So it's a revolutionary idea then. It still kind of is today. And it all starts with Abraham. So let me pause here and point out that a number of people have often asked questions like, why this tribe? Why Abraham? Why the Jews? Why this one particular group of people? What about all the other people of all the other tribes and religions and perspectives? Isn't the Bible too narrow in its insistence that God works through this one story of this one tribe that comes from this one man named Abraham? Those are great questions. You should be asking those questions. If you read the Bible and you don't have those kinds of questions, you're probably not really reading the Bible all that well, which is why the story of Melchizedek is so compelling. So after a battle against King Chedorlaomer, Abraham is traveling through the king's valley where he meets King Melchizedek of Salem, who brings bread and wine and blesses Abraham. He brings bread and wine. I'm just going to let that sit with you for a minute as you think about enlarging your perspective on this story. So why is this interesting? Well, it's because Melchizedek is described as priest of God Most High. What? The story starts with Abraham, right? That's where it begins. Everything is falling apart. The violence between two sons has escalated into a whole world at odds with itself. People are trying to build a tower to the heavens to become like gods. There's been a flood. All of that's gotten so out of control that Genesis 12 begins with something new, starting something brand new, a new tribe through a particular guy named Abraham. God wants to create a new kind of people to take creation in a whole new direction, because so far in the first 11 chapters of Genesis, things haven't really gone all that well. I mean, that's basically the story the Bible is telling. But then Abraham runs into a dude on his way back from battle who is a priest of God Most High. And this guy blesses Abraham. I mean, wasn't Abraham the one supposed to do the blessing? And then Abraham gives him 1/10 of everything. Why does Abraham tithe to Melchizedek? If this is a story about the new thing God is doing, how come a character shows up who is already in on the new thing God is doing? So much so, he actually blesses Abraham. And then why does Abraham give him 1/10 of all the stuff? I mean, that's how you treat a God. You give them tithes and offerings. And to further the mystery, we don't get any background on Melchizedek other than that he's the king of righteousness. That's what his name means. Now, generally, kings are kings of something, an area, a landmass, a group of people, a nation, but this king is the king of righteousness and justice. What? And then he's gone. Abraham moves on. Melchizedek goes who knows where. We don't hear about him again. The narrator doesn't seem to have any interest in giving us more information. He shows up, He blesses, he serves bread and wine, and then the action moves elsewhere. It reminds me of a character in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. In the first book, The Fellowship of the Ring, there's this interesting character, apparently powerful character, jovial character, named Tom Bombadil, who basically saves the hobbits early on in the story, seems to know a whole lot about stuff going on, is very mysterious, and then disappears, and we never hear about Tom Bombadil again. It's kind of like Melchizedek. He's this really interesting character who seems to know a lot of what's going on, has some power, and then we never hear about him again. Until the Psalms and the book of Hebrews, which we'll get to in a minute. But first, let's circle back to the question about particularity, because it's one a lot of people have. It's one of those assumptions people have about the Bible, that the Bible is narrow. It's only for some people, that God only saves some. It's through the Israelites first, and then it's the Christians, that God is only working through this group, these people. If you're not in this nationality, this church, you're not one of the chosen. It's a theme in a lot of churches, double predestination. God only predestines some for salvation. Or thinking God only works through certain groups. And it's the assumption, especially in the Old Testament, that God chooses Abraham and the Jews, and that's how God gives God's revelation to the world. But that's maybe one of those assumptions we need to take out and put in a drawer. This is why I'm telling you about Melchizedek. Within the Bible itself, especially here in the opening pages in Genesis, here is a clear example of someone knowing God, walking with God, blessing people in the name of God without having any connection to this particular Abraham story that's unfolding. It's somebody outside the narrative who also seems to be in on what's going on. It happens throughout the Bible that there's again the assumption that God's only working through the Israelites. And this particular story of the Bible has a lot of that. But even in the pages of the Old Testament, we see God working through those not in this tribe. Ruth is a Moabite woman, one of the enemies of Israel. She actually becomes in the line of Jesus. Same with the Rahab, a harlot from Jericho. Throughout, Jesus uses Roman centurions and Gentiles in the New Testament. In both Testaments, God uses people, reveals God's self to people and things and places not just in the tribe of Israel. So it's a wrong assumption to think that God is only working through this one tribe. That tribe of Israel might have primacy, but still God's vision for the world has always been broader. It's not just a New Testament thing that includes the Gentiles. God's view is always bigger. See, the criticism of the Bible is often from those who see it as limiting the divine presence, prohibiting the possibility that people outside of this one particular story can have a genuine connection with the divine. But if you read the Bible, you quickly discover that this is not the story that it actually tells. Melchizedek is a deeply mysterious, open, and welcoming character who appears on the scene, blessing Abraham, who was actually still called Abram at that point, in the name of God. And how does he bless besides the prayer he says over Abraham? Oh yeah, he brings bread and wine, which provides an excellent segue to Jesus. So Melchizedek is mentioned in the Psalms once. And then the only other time he appears in the Bible is in the book of Hebrews, chapter 7, where the writer is trying to explain how Jesus can be understood as a priest, but not the kind of priest that people had any categories for. And how does the writer do this? By comparing Jesus to Melchizedek. Jesus is said to be a priest according to the order of Melchizedek, a priest of the Most High God, who is a priest not through legal requirement, requiring physical descent like in the priesthood of Levi, but through the power of an indestructible life. It's interesting, isn't it? That's when the writer tries to search for a way to explain how God works in new and fresh ways through already existing structures. The image that writer uses is Melchizedek. So what does all this about Melchizedek have to do with us here in 2020? Well, don't be surprised when you meet people who have none of your religious background and maybe baggage, and yet clearly have a genuine connection with the divine. This is normal and healthy, and I'm going to say it biblical. Throughout the Bible, people meet people outside the normal realm of Judaism or Christianity or Jerusalem who want to know about God, who already do know about God, who can be a blessing. God in the Bible rarely limits, it's almost always expanding. So don't be caught off guard when people show up from outside of whatever system or institution or religion or perspective or doctrine or worldview or culture you've created, and they have something profound and good to give you. This is often how the story goes, doesn't it? Even in today's divisive political climate, maybe, the liberals might have something to give the conservatives. The conservatives might have something to give and bless the liberals. Those who say, I'm not in either one of those two camps, they might be the one that blesses both. It's how the story goes. So when it comes to the Bible, don't let lame critiques sidetrack you from actually reading the stories. These are radical, progressive, open, expansive, extraordinary stories about the God who is bigger and broader and beyond any one tribe. Yes, these stories are told from the perspective of actual people living in space and time, and they often do reflect the earlier consciousness of those times and places. But so do the stories we're telling right now. It's all on a continuum, a trajectory, and if you keep this in mind, reminding yourself that these are human stories before anything else, it will free you to not only see our common humanity, but you may even find the divine lurking there in all that bone and dust and spirit and blood. Jesus said his Father is always at work. This makes an excellent assumption for us to live with as we go about our lives. The divine is always at work. So when someone you don't recognize shows up with bread and wine or maybe a blessing, it may be the Most High God giving you what you need, blessing you, reminding you who you are and why you're here. God is always at work through the people and the places and the systems maybe we don't expect. So let's not narrow our vision of who God is and who God works with and through. Let's broaden it, because the real story of the Bible is a God who constantly confounds our expectations and works with and through anyone and anything. Thanks be to God.